Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a silence in the deep places of the galaxy that no ship's instruments can measure. It is not the silence of empty space, the cold quiet between stars where light takes centuries to travel from one point to another. It is something older than that, something more deliberate. It is the silence of secrets buried so deeply that even those who buried them no longer remember why. The 41st Millennium, or what scholars of the Adeptus Terra now call the closing years of that age as M42 unfolds around us, is a setting built as much on what is not known as on what is. It is a universe of crumbling records, of archives scoured by flame, of scribes who wrote careful truths onto parchment only for inquisitors to arrive 3 centuries later with orders to remove those truths from history entirely. And every great faction in this setting carries mysteries at its core. The Imperium of man, 10,000 years old and rotting from within, guards secrets it has forgotten, it is keeping. The Eldar, ancient beyond the capacity of human calendars to measure, hide things even from themselves. The Necrons sleep in tombs that contain not just bodies and weapons, but entire chapters of history that the galaxy would be better for knowing. Or perhaps worse. That is what we are here to explore today. 50 of the most enduring, most unsettling, most thought-provoking mysteries that the Warhammer 40,000 universe has ever placed before its audience. Some of these are ancient questions stretching back to the game's earliest editions. Some are wounds that recent lore has only reopened. A few are so recent that even now, as we speak, lore writers at Black Library are perhaps crafting the answers, or deliberately choosing not to. So find a comfortable place. Let the sounds of the world around you soften and recede. We are going to a very old, very dark place together, and we are going to explore what lives in the corners that the light has never touched. Part 1. The Emperor, the Man, the Mystery, the Machine. There is no more fundamental mystery in all of Warhammer 40,000 than the figure sitting at the heart of it all, the Emperor of mankind, the God on the golden throne, the Carrion Lord. He has more names than perhaps any other figure in this universe's history, and none of them fully capture what he is, what he was, or what he might become. Let us begin with him, because almost every other mystery in this setting eventually leads back to his door. Mystery 1. What is the Emperor's true name? Here is a thing that the Imperium, an empire built entirely around the worship of this being, does not know. Malcador the Sigillite, who served at the Emperor's side for longer than most civilizations have existed, stated plainly that he had never known his master's true name. In ancient Terra's distant past, the Emperor went by Neoth, a name known to a woman called Erda, possibly one of his oldest companions. But that is one name from one fragment of his incomprehensible history. Before Neoth, before the identity that would eventually become the Emperor of mankind, there were thousands of years of walking among ordinary humans, watching civilizations rise and collapse, never revealing what he truly was. The Emperor has lived for at least 50,000 years before the narrative of 40K even begins. He was born from the collective ritual suicide of thousands of prehistoric shamans who pooled their psychic power and reincarnated together into a single vessel of terrible strength. But between that birth and the moment he emerged publicly to unite Terra under one banner, there is an enormous gulf of undocumented time. He had other identities, other names, other faces perhaps. The Horus Heresy novels have been quietly scattering breadcrumbs, small references, old names glimpsed in passing, but a definitive answer has never been given, and it seems deliberate. The Emperor's true name may be one of those mysteries that Games Workshop never intends to resolve. The namelessness is the point. He is too old to be defined. As Mystery 2, was the Emperor always planning to become a god? This is a question that cuts to the philosophical center of what this setting is actually about. The emperor, in his public life, hated religion. He forbade the worship of himself as a divine being during the Great Crusade. He dismantled cults, he banned shrines, he drove the ecclesiarchy's precursor organizations from positions of power. And yet, after his internment upon the Golden Throne, the Imperium he left behind became one of the most fanatical theocracies in fictional history, and the sacrifice of 1,000 souls every single day maintains his existence. Did he know this would happen? Did he plan for it? There are darker readings available. The theory that the Emperor always intended to harness human belief as psychic fuel, that the entire Imperium was, from the beginning, a vast machine for generating worship, would make him not a benevolent guardian, but something closer to a god cultivating his own flock. The fact that his power in the warp has grown proportionally to his worship, the fact that he produces effects in the material universe that are functionally indistinguishable from genuine miracles, that the Sisters of Battle fight and survive things that should kill them under the protection of something. All of this points toward a being that has, whatever his original intentions, become exactly what he claimed to oppose. And then there is the incident documented in the closing volumes of the Siege of Terror series. The Emperor, in order to match the chaos-empowered Horus blow for blow, drew so deeply upon the warp, upon the faith and belief of billions, that he came to the threshold of becoming a chaos god himself. He pulled back. He shed that power like a burning garment, but the power he shed did not disappear. Some whisper, it drifts in the warp still, waiting. Mystery 3. What does the Emperor actually think, sitting on the Golden Throne? He has been there for 10,000 years. His body is a ruin, maintained on the edge of death by a mechanism that requires daily sacrifice to function. And yet, his mind continues to operate, guiding the Astronomicon, reaching out through visions and dreams to space marines in moments of crisis, influencing events in ways that suggest active intelligence rather than passive endurance. But what is he experiencing? What does consciousness feel like when stretched across 10,000 years of immobility and pain? Is he watching every war, every death, every prayer offered in his name? Does he perceive each psyker fed into the Golden Throne as an individual being or as raw energy? Does he want to be freed? The Lion L. Johnson, who returned in recent lore as a Primarch, awakened from the Dark Angel's Fortress Monastery, had visions of his father as a man in torment, not a god serene in his power, but something much closer to a prisoner begging for release. The Sisters of Silence, being psychic nulls, see the Emperor without the golden halo of the warp's projection. One account describes a simple man, ageless but human-featured, sitting in armor, mouth open in a silent scream. The display of divine majesty is something the warp adds, while not something that originates from him. Whatever is happening inside that ancient mind, the Imperium is not asking. To ask would be heresy. Mystery 4. The Star Child. Is there a reincarnation in the warp? This mystery stretches back to the earliest editions of the game, to source books called the Realms of Chaos volumes that painted the warp as a place where the souls of the dead might linger, transform, accumulate power. The theory, which has fluctuated between semi-canonical and explicitly declared apocryphal over the decades, goes like this. The Emperor's wounds at the hands of Horus were mortal, but not final. He could not die, because the Golden Throne prevents death. But he could not fully heal either, because the wounds were inflicted by weapons soaked in chaos energy, and so his soul, rather than remaining fully anchored in his ruined body, has been bleeding slowly into the warp for 10,000 years. Most of that escaping soul has dissolved, consumed by the predators that haunt the Empyrean. But a core, a fragment of essential self, something irreducible, has survived. And in the warp, that fragment has taken on a life of its own. It floats there, like a child in a reed boat on a storm-tossed ocean. The Star Child. the Star Child is sometimes described as the Emperor's compassion made manifest. The part of himself he was forced to cast aside to destroy Horus, the love he could not afford in the final moments of that terrible duel. Some say it is his humanity. Some say it is his future self waiting to be born again. The Horus Heresy novels have been quietly reintroducing this concept, the end and the death. The climactic volumes of that series explicitly describe a portion of the Emperor being split away from him. And there are hints in recent lore of the Illuminati, a secret society of those who have survived demon possession and know truths about chaos that others cannot, operating in the background of the Imperium's history with a long, long plan in mind. Whether that plan involves the Star Child, and whether the Star Child is hope or danger, has not been answered. Mystery 5. The Terminus Decree. What were the Grey Knights meant to do? For years, this was one of the most beloved unsolved puzzles in all of 40K lore. Before the Emperor was placed upon the Golden Throne, he left final instructions for the Grey Knights, the most secret chapter of Space Marines in existence, the ones who exist beyond the knowledge of even the Inquisition's general membership, the hunters of demons whose names are never to be spoken by ordinary soldiers. He left them a sealed order that only the Supreme Grand Master could open. This was the Terminus Decree. Fans spent years speculating. Was it instructions for resurrecting the Emperor? A weapon against the Chaos Gods? A map to something the Imperium had lost? A last command about the Webway? The answer, when Games Workshop finally revealed it through a new codex, was both simpler and more devastating than most expected. The Terminus Decree's instruction to the Grey Knights is this: if the Emperor ever leaves the Golden Throne, whether he recovers and tries to walk free, whether he ascends to godhood, whether he is reborn in a new form, the Grey Knights are to stop him, or to kill him or force him back. The supreme duty of the most secretive Space Marine chapter in the Imperium is not to serve the Emperor's will, but to override it. And the decree offers no guidance whatsoever for how this should actually be accomplished against a being of his power. Some fans were thrilled by this answer. Others felt it diminished the mystery. But there remains a fascinating unresolved thread. What does this imply about what the Emperor fears he might become if freed? He arranged his own imprisonment. He wrote the orders for the jailers himself. Mystery 6. The Dark King. What was this entity and where did it go? In the final hours of the Siege of Terror, as the Emperor drained himself to match Horus, something began to manifest in the warp around him, something that the Chaos Gods feared, as something they had been trying to prevent for a very long time, not because they wanted to defeat the Emperor, but because what he was becoming was a threat to them. It was given a name in whispers: the Dark King, a being of absolute annihilation, a force that would not save the galaxy but unmake it. Not chaos, not order, but something beyond both. The Emperor pulled back from the edge. He reclaimed his humanity in the final moment and destroyed Horus without becoming the Dark King. But the energy he had gathered and then cast aside, the potential for this entity, did not simply vanish. It dispersed into the warp. The Chaos Gods, who had been moving pieces on the board for thousands of years to prevent this particular outcome, breathed something like relief. And yet, the power is still out there. Somewhere in the immaterial sea, as the potential for the Dark King exists as an echo, a promise, a threat. Whether it can be awakened again, whether anything in the narrative is moving toward its eventual manifestation, is a question that the lore has not yet answered. It may be the deepest of all the Emperor-related mysteries, because it suggests that salvation and annihilation are not opposites in this universe. They may be the same thing, wearing different faces. Mystery 7. Can the Emperor actually be saved, and does he want to be? The Golden Throne is failing. This is not speculation. It is stated plainly in multiple recent sources. The Adeptus Custodes know it. The Fabricator General of Mars knows it. Robert Guilliman, returned Primarch and current de facto ruler of the Imperium, is aware of it. 4 times the number of Psykers are sacrificed daily now compared to what was required when the Emperor first ascended, just to maintain the same output. The machinery is ancient, irreplaceable, designed by technology that the Imperium can no longer replicate. An expedition was launched to find answers. A desperate arrangement was made with the Drukhari, the Dark Eldar, those monstrous artisans of suffering, to trade genetic material from the Emperor in exchange for their unique expertise in repairing the throne's alien components. It fell apart before it could be completed. The knowledge died with those involved. Robert Guilliman spoke to his father on the Golden Throne. He received no answer, only the sensation of attention, of something vast and damaged trying to hear him across a distance too great for words. At whether the Emperor can be healed without the throne, whether removing him would simply accelerate his death, whether he is capable of the kind of rebirth the shamans who made him once managed, all of this remains open. And then there is the darkest possibility, that the Emperor does not want to be saved, that 10,000 years of watching the Imperium commit atrocities in his name, 10,000 years of witnessing the vision he had for humanity become the dystopian horror it is now, have left him with no desire to return. That the silence from the Golden Throne is not helplessness, but grief. Part 2. The Lost Primarchs. The 2 whose names were burned. If the Emperor's mysteries are the theological heart of Warhammer 40K, then the mystery of the 2 lost Primarchs is its most intimate personal tragedy. There were 20 of them created. 18 survived to lead their legions. The other 2, the 2nd and the 11th, were erased from history so completely that not even their fellow Primarchs speak of them openly. Mystery 8. What actually happened to the Primarchs of Legions 2 and 11? The erasure is total and deliberate. When the Emperor scattered the Primarchs across the galaxy as infants, a catastrophe blamed on the interference of the Chaos Gods, all 20 were eventually recovered and united with their legions. All 20, by most accounts. But the records of the 2nd and 11th were destroyed. Their names are gone. Their legions were disbanded and their warriors absorbed into other formations. Their battle honors were stricken from every archive that imperial decree could reach. What does this mean? In an empire that canonizes its heroes and preserves battle honors for 10,000 years, the act of deliberate forgetting on this scale is itself a statement. Whatever happened, the Emperor judged that humanity was better served not knowing about it. That is an extraordinary determination from a being who was, at that time, still walking among his subjects, still capable of explaining himself. The theories are many, and they divide into a few broad categories. First, genetic failure. The gene seed of these 2 Primarchs may have been so fundamentally corrupted that the legions raised from it posed an unacceptable threat to everything around them. Not through treachery, but through biology. Mutations that could not be managed, psychological profiles that could not be trained into stability, are something in the base template that made these warriors into monsters regardless of their individual choices. Second, betrayal worse than Horus. This is a fan favorite because the Horus heresy itself was the worst catastrophe in human history. And if the lost Primarchs committed something that makes Horus's betrayal look forgivable by comparison, the imagination staggers at what that could be. Allying with Xenos? Attempting to overthrow the Emperor not out of chaos corruption but out of ideological opposition? Advocating for the extermination of humanity itself? Third, the Rangdan connection. This is the most tantalizing thread of all, and it deserves its own section. Mystery 9. Were the lost Primarchs destroyed in the Rangdan Xenocides? The Rangdan Xenocides are a series of 3 campaigns fought during the Great Crusade against an alien species called the Rangdan Sarabvoris. They were, by any measure, the worst wars the young Imperium ever fought, at least until the Horus heresy. Over 80,000 Space Marines and millions of Imperial Army soldiers died in these campaigns. Whole expeditionary fleets were annihilated. Entire Titan legions were destroyed. The casualties were so extreme that the progress of the Great Crusade itself was significantly delayed, as the armies needed to fight everyone else had been fed into the Rangdan meat grinder. A document referenced in the lore, described as a field guide to the Rangdan campaigns issued to Solar Auxilia troops, contains a mention of the 2nd and 11th legions being deployed to fight the Rangda. As this is tantalizing not because it definitively answers anything, but because it opens a door. If these 2 legions were deployed against the most terrifying alien threat the Imperium had yet encountered, and if they did not return, if something happened during those campaigns that made their existence itself a liability to the Imperium's future, then the Rangdan genocides would be the site of both the military disaster and the secret that had to be buried. What happened to the Rangda themselves adds another layer of darkness. The Dark Angels Legion, which bore the brunt of the fighting, ordered all records of the Rangdan and the wars against them sealed or destroyed. No images of the Rangda exist. The descriptions that survived suggest beings of alien power who employed slave armies controlled through neural collars, who fired radioactive electromagnetic weapons that left horrifying shadows on their victims. Some accounts describe the Rangda as possessing sloth murder minds, a phrase suggesting a connection to another alien species entirely, the sloth, a race of maggot-bodied immortals who followed in the wake of the Rangdan campaigns, harvesting the dead. The Emperor himself is documented as having intervened personally in the conflict, opening something called the Labyrinth of Night and deploying an asset so dangerous it required his direct presence to control. Many readers have interpreted this as referring to the Void Dragon, one of the Satan, the ancient star gods of the Necrons, which is believed by some to be imprisoned beneath the surface of Mars itself. If the 2nd and 11th legions were consumed in this war, as destroyed not through treachery, but through a catastrophe too terrible to be admitted to, then their erasure makes a different kind of sense. Not punishment, not shame, grief, and the unbearable weight of a truth that would shake the faith of every soldier in the Imperium. Mystery. 10. Did one of the lost Primarchs survive? This theory has never been confirmed, but it has never been definitively ruled out either, and the lore keeps generating small pieces of evidence that fuel it. The idea is that one of the 2 lost Primarchs, not destroyed, not dead, but changed, is still somewhere in the galaxy, operating under a different name or a different form. The circumstantial case rests on several points. Primarchs are extraordinarily difficult to kill permanently. Well, they are not mortal beings. They exist simultaneously in the physical world and in the warp, their souls enormous and anchored in ways that ordinary life is not. Even Sanguinius, killed by Horus at the Siege of Terra, left a psychic echo so powerful that it manifests 10,000 years later as the black rage of the Blood Angels. To kill a Primarch thoroughly requires effort at a cosmic scale. The missing Legion's warriors were not executed. They were reassigned, absorbed into other formations. This is consistent with a reorganization rather than a purge. Reorganizations happen when the original structure is no longer viable, not necessarily when the original structure committed a crime requiring punishment. And then there are the cryptic references scattered through the novels and codices, mentions of ancient figures who predate known history, whose genetic profiles trigger alerts in apothecary equipment, without matching any known Primarch template. Whether Games Workshop ever intends to resolve this is uncertain. The mystery itself has become so beloved that resolving it risks disappointing everyone who holds a theory close to their heart. Mystery 11. What were the names of the 2 lost Primarchs? This might be the simplest mystery on this list, and yet it is one of the most stubbornly kept. Games Workshop has had decades of opportunities to drop these names into lore as background detail, as something found in an ancient archive, as a whispered reference in a character's internal monologue. They have chosen, consistently, not to. Or the names are so absent from the narrative that their absence is itself a presence. Every character who was alive during the Great Crusade behaves as though they have actively chosen not to think about these two individuals. Even Lehman Russ, who was famously close to both his brothers and his father, becomes conspicuously silent on this subject. Even Magnus the Red, whose memory is powerful enough to retain information across 10,000 years, does not speak of them. Even Reboot Gilliman, currently in the process of trying to rebuild the Imperium with eyes clearer than anyone alive, does not pursue this thread. The silence suggests that knowing the names would be dangerous, or that the names themselves carry a curse, or that the trauma is so total, so foundational, that even minds as vast as those of the Primarchs cannot look at it directly without flinching. Mystery 12. What is the full extent of what the Rangda were? Here is a mystery within a mystery. The Rangdan Cerebvores, the alien species that nearly destroyed the Imperium during the Great Crusade, were never fully explained. Their appearance is undocumented, their home systems largely erased, their technology described only in fragments. They were tall, lithe, and monstrous. Their ships bristled with spines and metallic tentacles that trailed behind them like the arms of deep-sea creatures. Their weapons could cast shadows onto their targets that survivors described as worse than the wounds themselves. They possessed war moons, artificial satellites manned by millions of enslaved beings, controlled through neural collars of alien manufacture. This level of technological achievement, maintained by beings described as a cerebvore species, the term implies brain-eating, or something adjacent to that horror, suggests a civilization that had developed along radically different lines from any of the major powers in the 40K galaxy. And then there is the question of the sloth, these creatures, whose bodies are made of hundreds of writhing worm-like organisms that can reform and reshape themselves, who are immune to age and poison and disease, who are known to historians of the Forbidden as the Carrion Lords and the Maggot Men, were documented following in the wake of the Rangdan campaigns, harvesting everything left behind. Were they the Rangda's masters, their servants, of an unrelated opportunistic predator taking advantage of the carnage? The Dark Angels buried the answer, and the Dark Angels, as any observer of their behavior across 10,000 years of lore can attest, bury things very, very well. Mystery 13. The last moments of the Second Legion's Primarch. If we accept the theory that the 2nd or 11th Legion's Primarch died in or around the Rangdan Xenocides, then somewhere in the galaxy, there is a location, a battlefield, a dead world, a lost system, where one of the Emperor's sons drew his last breath. There was no funeral oration that was kept. No memorial in the Hall of Heroes on Terra bears a clear reference to either of them. Whatever grief the Emperor felt, he did not allow it to be recorded. There is something profound in that silence that goes beyond mere military secrecy. The Emperor was a being who had walked among humans for 50,000 years, who had known friendship and connection across centuries, who had, for all his coldness in the public record, clearly loved some of his sons in ways that his position and the war he was fighting made difficult to express. The complete erasure of these two suggests not just administrative decision, but the kind of pain that cannot be looked at, the kind of grief that buries itself, because the alternative is to drown in it. Part 3. The Ghoul Stars. Where the nightmare lives. There is a region at the far northeastern edge of the known galaxy, beyond the light of the Astronomicon, beyond the range of reliable navigation, where the stars are old and cold and few. The systems there orbit red and brown dwarf suns that barely warm the rocks that circle them. It is called the Ghoul Stars. It is also, in some older texts, called the Ghost Stars. The names are appropriate. Both names carry in them the sense of something that should not still be present, but is. Mystery 14. What is the Pale Wasting? During a period of imperial history called the Nova Terra Interregnum, roughly the 34th millennium, an era of civil war and fracture when two separate imperiums effectively existed simultaneously, something emerged from the Ghoul Stars that nearly destroyed the Segmentum Ultima. The records that survived call it the Pale Wasting. Those records are fragmentary because the Inquisition subsequently moved through the archives of that period and removed most of what could be found. Well, what remains is this. The Pale Wasting was described simultaneously as a star-spawned plague that swept across entire worlds and as nightmare engines that butchered the populations of entire sectors. These two descriptions are not obviously compatible, which is itself part of the mystery. Either survivors were describing different aspects of the same threat in terms their limited understanding could accommodate, or the Pale Wasting was genuinely two things at once, a biological component and a mechanical one, working in combination. 11 Space Marine chapters were destroyed in the war against the Pale Wasting. 11. For context, the entire First Founding produced only 20 legions, and those legions were each equivalent in strength to dozens of ordinary chapters. To lose 11 chapters in a single campaign is a military disaster almost without parallel in the galaxy's post-heresy history. The Nova Marines fought there and are listed among the campaign's battle honors, but their own records of the conflict are curiously silent. One of their earliest and most distinguished acts of service is the one they refuse to document. In response to the Pale Wasting, the Imperium launched the 13th founding of the Adeptus Astartes. One of the chapters created during this founding, the Death Spectres, was immediately stationed at the border of the Ghoul Stars, with a standing order to ensure that whatever had come out of there never came out again. Whatever it was, it is still there. The Death Spectres are still watching. Mystery 15. Who are the Scythe of Fiends, and where did they go? In 990 of the 41st Millennium, a date practically within living memory by the standards of this setting, the High Marshal of the Black Templars Space Marine chapter, Helbrecht, declared a crusade against a species called the Scythor Fiends that inhabited the Ghoul Stars. This was a major military operation. Within 8 years, the Black Templars had exterminated the outer populations of the Scythor Fiends and pushed all the way to their homeworld, a gas giant designated 9836-18 Grave Core. They found nothing. The core systems were empty, not destroyed, not abandoned in haste, simply empty, as if a civilization had picked up and departed without leaving a forwarding address. No bodies, no debris, no indication of what had happened to a species that the Black Templars had been fighting a large-scale war against just 8 years before. Before they could investigate further, the distress call from Armageddon arrived, and Helbrecht pulled his forces out to respond to a more immediate crisis. The mystery of the Scythor Fiend's disappearance was simply filed away, because the 41st Millennium does not allow adequate time to investigate all its horrors. Were the Scythor Fiends even the true threat? Were they, like the Rangda, simply the visible face of something much older and much stranger that operated from deeper within the Ghoul Stars? Did they leave under their own power? Were they removed by whatever built the Ghoul Stars into the death trap it evidently is? In M42, the Black Templars launched another crusade into the Ghoul Stars, the Oparian Crusade. It has not come back. Many believe it is still fighting somewhere in those cold, dark systems. Some believe it encountered something that made the Scythe of Fiends seem manageable. Mystery 16. What exactly lives in the Ghoul Stars? Let's map what is known. The region is home to dead worlds where humans once lived. Entire civilizations that existed before the Age of Strife were scoured away by some ancient event. Possibly the Krav, a mind-controlling alien species, were involved in this ancient extermination. The region contains the tomb world of Drazak, a Necron facility where the particularly disturbing subset of Necrons known as Flayed Ones, warriors driven to insanity who clad themselves in the flesh of their victims, are centered. It contains species so alien that they exist partially outside normal physical reality, and creatures whose abilities defy even the bent rules of the universe that 40K operates under. To quote one admirably honest assessment, in 977 of the 41st Millennium, a Tyranid splinter fleet passed through the Ghoul Stars, on its way to attack the sentinel world of Orask. When it emerged, it was wrong, twisted in ways that Imperial xenologers had never documented in any other Tyranid force. The organisms that came out of the ghoul stars were different from what had gone in, as though something in that region had touched the Tyranid biome and changed it at a fundamental level. The splinter fleet was defeated, but the implications of what had happened to it were never fully examined. Even the Astronomicon, the Emperor's psychic beacon that guides all Imperial navigation, barely reaches into the ghoul stars. Ships that go there navigate blind, following dead reckoning and hope. Navigators report that the warp in that region behaves differently from elsewhere, more like a dream than a storm. Whether that is better or worse depends on what is doing the dreaming. Mystery 17. Are the Death Spectres keeping something out or something in? The Death Spectres chapter has perhaps the strangest initiation rite in all of the Adeptus Astartes. Their recruits must experience death and resurrection as part of the process of becoming a full battle brother. This is not metaphorical. Initiates undergo a ritual that involves their hearts being stopped and their brain activity ceasing before they are revived. Those who do not come back are honored. Those who do are changed. This ritual implies that the Death Spectres have developed an intimate relationship with the boundary between life and death that goes beyond what other chapters require for their purposes. A chapter stationed at the edge of the ghoul stars, told to ensure that whatever came from there does not come again, might develop such a relationship for purely practical reasons. If the enemies in those cold systems are things that operate in the space between the living and the dead, you would want soldiers who know that space personally. But there is a version of this story where the Death Spectres are not just guards against something escaping outward. There is a version where their vigil is also a seal, where their continued presence, their continued ritual, their continued state of being soldiers who have died and returned, had performed some function in keeping a deeper darkness contained. What that darkness is, what would happen if the chapter were destroyed or the vigil ended, the lore does not say. Mystery 18. What ancient human civilization did the ghoul stars consume? Before the Age of Strife, before the warp storms that shattered human civilization across the galaxy, the ghoul stars contained human worlds. There were people there, communities, perhaps cities, possibly an entire regional civilization that had managed to reach these distant systems during the high point of the dark age of technology. Something killed them all and left nothing but dead worlds. This massacre predates the Pale Wasting by thousands of years. Whatever happened there was not the Pale Wasting. It happened much earlier, and possibly before any of the species we know today had reached the galactic northeast. The dead worlds are all that remain, their surfaces scoured of life as completely as if they had been fusion bombed. But the archaeology suggests the annihilation was not physical. Something killed the people without necessarily destroying the infrastructure. Some dead worlds in this region retain intact structures, buildings, roads, the shells of cities, with no inhabitants and no obvious cause of death. The Crave are one possibility. These mind-controlling xenospecies, capable of invading the consciousness of their prey and puppeting them from within, could theoretically have depopulated a region without leaving physical traces if they consumed or enslaved everyone before moving on. But even that explanation feels insufficient for the sheer scale of the emptiness in the ghoul stars. Part 4. The Great Devourer. Mysteries from Beyond the Edge. The Tyranids arrived from outside the galaxy. This single fact is more unsettling than almost anything else about them. Every other threat in the 41st millennium is, in some sense, internal, a product of the galaxy's own history, its own ancient conflicts, its own accumulated sins. But the Tyranids came from the intergalactic void, from the space between galaxies where nothing should live, and they came because they were attracted here. Something in this galaxy called to them across distances that light takes millions of years to cross. They heard it, and they came. Mysteries in Team.
Okay, I have to pause here for just a second because we're about halfway through and I genuinely cannot decide which of these mysteries bothers me the most. Rationally, I know the Golden Throne and the Lost Primarchs are the big ones. Those are civilization-ending questions. But something about a Hive fleet Tiamat just sits wrong with me in a way that I can't shake. The idea that one tiny fleet has been quietly sitting in a system for 6,000 years, slowly building something we don't understand, that is the one thing that keeps me up, to be honest. There's something uniquely uncomfortable about a threat that doesn't announce itself. That patient kind of horror is what makes 40K's unanswered questions so much more interesting than its answered ones. The mystery is always scarier than the explanation. But anyways, that's just my take. You can drop yours in the comments, and let's go back to the video.
What called the Tyranids to this galaxy? The hive mind is not an individual intelligence. It is a collective, the sum of every psychic signal from every Tyranid organism in every hive fleet, forming a single immense consciousness that perceives everything its constituent parts perceive and directs them toward its goals. The goal is consumption. The hive mind needs biomass to replicate, to grow, to send more tendrils toward more worlds. It is a force of nature with a mind, which is perhaps the most frightening thing in the universe. But even a force of nature with a mind requires something to navigate by. The Tyranids crossed the void between galaxies in a journey that would have taken longer than human civilization has existed, and they arrived in our galaxy, not randomly distributed across its edges, but coming from a specific direction and heading towards specific targets. Something acted as a beacon. Some say it was the Emperor himself. The Astronomicon, that vast psychic lighthouse maintained by his will and fueled by the deaths of thousands, projects into the warp with an intensity that dwarfs almost anything else humanity has ever produced. To a mind accustomed to hunting psychic signals across millions of light years, the Astronomicon might have been indistinguishable from a dinner bell. Others point to the collective psychic potential of humanity itself. Humanity is evolving. The number of psychers being born into the species increases every generation. The growing weight of human psychic activity in the warp is something that the hive mind, which navigates by psychic signal, would be able to detect long before it arrived. A darker theory suggests that the Eldar Crone worlds, those ancient sites of Eldar civilization that fell to chaos in the fall of the Eldar, emit a continuous psychic scream from the warp gods housed within them. This scream may have carried farther than anyone realizes. Mystery 20. Hive Fleet. Tiamat and the Machine. Being built on Zeophoria. Here is a Tyranid fleet that does not behave like any other. While every other hive fleet known to Imperial xenography arrives, consumes, and moves on, stripping worlds of biomass and leaving dead rocks behind. Hive fleet Tiamat settled. It arrived at a large binary star system called the Tiamat system on the eastern fringe, found 7 life-bearing worlds there, killed the explorator fleet that discovered it, and then did not move on. That was first documented in the 35th millennium. By the 41st millennium, Tiamat has been in that system for 6,000 years. The worlds in the Tiamat system were fusion-bombed by the Imperium multiple times, and life came back every time, which is itself unusual for Tyranid-consumed worlds, but says something about how Tiamat operates. And on the largest world in the system, a jungle planet called Zeophoria, something is being built. Tiamat has been converting the entire ecology of Zeophoria into a biomechanical structure. The Ordo Xenos describes it as a psychic resonator. Psychers who approach the system report a building scream, a focused psychic emanation that gets louder the closer you get. The structure is not yet complete. Tiamat continues to gather biomass, continues to feed material into Zeophoria's surface, and the thing that is being built grows larger with each passing decade. What is it for? The theories within the lore suggest a beacon, something that would call more hive fleets into the galaxy, providing them a fixed reference point, and perhaps a psychic bridge across the void. If complete, the implications for the galaxy would be almost incomprehensible. But this raises its own question. If Tiamat has been working on this for 6,000 years and it is still not complete, what does that say about its scale, about the engineering involved, about the kind of signal it is meant to project? And there is an even stranger question underneath all of this. Does the hive mind, which is collectively intelligent, know what it is building on Zeophoria? Or is this something more instinctual, a vast organism constructing something according to biological programming without fully understanding the strategic purpose? Mystery 21. The Imgal Genestealers. Why does the hive mind reject them? Genestealers are the advanced scouts of Tyrannid hive fleets. Infiltrators seeded into target populations long before the main fleet arrives, infecting their hosts and creating Genestealer cults that weaken planetary defenses from within. They are instruments of the hive mind, extensions of its will, perfectly integrated into the great plan of approach and consumption. Except for the Imgal strain. The Imgal Genestealers, named for the moons of Imgal, where the Imperium first encountered them, are the oldest known Genestealer presence in the galaxy. They were there centuries before Hive Fleet Behemoth arrived, the first great confirmed Tyrannid invasion. They appear to have been seeded from Hive Fleet Tiamat during the 35th Millennium. He carried inadvertently to Imgal in the hulls of Imperial vessels that visited the Tiamat system and fled. They are physically distinct from standard Genestealers. The mass of fangs is replaced with writhing tentacles. They can shapeshift their own flesh within moments, changing color, changing the texture of their body, adapting in real time to incoming threats in ways that no other Tyrannid bioform can manage. This extreme adaptability makes them individually fearsome in ways that regular Genestealers are not. But the hive mind doesn't want them back. When a hive fleet sweeps across a world and consumes the Imgal Genestealers present, it refuses to reabsorb their genetic material. Their instabilities, the same instabilities that make them so dangerous, yet are also instabilities that would contaminate the carefully optimized genome of the greater swarm if reintroduced. The hive mind has, in effect, quarantined its own creation. The Imgal strain searches endlessly for a parent hive fleet that will accept them. They seek the signal of the hive mind and move toward it, only to be abandoned again each time. There is something in this that reads almost as loneliness, though projecting emotional states onto Tyrannid bioforms is the kind of anthropomorphization that Ordo Xenos Inquisitors warn against. Almost as loneliness. Almost. Mystery 22. Where did the Tyrannids come from, and what did they leave behind? The intergalactic void between the Milky Way and its neighbors is not empty. It contains something, but we do not know what consumed it, whether it was the Tyrannids themselves on their journey here, or whether the Tyrannids fled something that had already consumed everything in their home galaxy. The possibility that the Tyrannids are not the greatest predator in the universe, but are in fact refugees fleeing something even worse, is one of those thoughts that makes experienced lore readers go quiet. The hive mind does not communicate its origins. It does not explain itself. It does not negotiate. When confronted with this question in the abstract, and several inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos have devoted their careers to it, the only data available is what can be inferred from the direction of the Tyrannids' approach and the patterns of their movement. They came from a specific direction. They are still, in aggregate, moving further into the galaxy in that direction rather than sweeping across it randomly. Something about the interior of the Milky Way is drawing them deeper in. Some xenologists believe that the Tyrannids are older than any other species still active in the galaxy, that they were consuming worlds when the Necrons still had flesh, that the hive mind has seen the rise and fall of civilizations that no record anywhere preserves, and that the hunger they bring is not greed, it is necessity. They are running out of somewhere else to go. Mystery 23. The shadow in the warp. Is it sentient strategy or instinct? Whenever a Tyranid hive fleet approaches in significant numbers, the warp in the surrounding region becomes impenetrable. Psychic communication becomes impossible. The Astronomicon cannot be seen through the shadow in the warp, as it is called. A great psychic static that blocks all signals in and out. Ships cannot navigate. Librarians cannot commune with other psychers. Astropaths go mad or fall silent. This is devastating enough in practical military terms. It isolates every system in the path of a hive fleet, ensuring that no call for help can get out, and no coordinated defense can be organized. But is it intentional? Is the shadow in the warp a deliberate weapon, something the hive mind deploys as part of its invasion strategy? Or is it simply a side effect of so many Tyranid organisms collectively broadcasting their psychic presence, a form of accidental interference that happens to be strategically effective? The answer matters enormously. If the shadow in the warp is deliberate, yet it implies that the hive mind understands the Imperium well enough to target its communication infrastructure. If it is not deliberate, it implies that the Tyranid presence in the galaxy is already large enough to generate strategic-level effects just from the aggregate weight of its biology. Neither answer is comforting. Part 5. The Necrons. Ancient Sins and Eternal Questions. The Necrons were once flesh, once alive. Once built civilizations sophisticated enough to wage war against the old ones, the original masters of the galaxy, and win. They traded their bodies for immortality in a process called biotransference, pouring their minds and personalities into metal frames designed to endure forever. And then most of them slept for 60 million years, while the galaxy changed beyond recognition around them. Mystery 24. What is the Silent King's true plan? Sarek, the Silent King, was the last of the Triarch, the ruling council of the ancient Necrontyr civilization. He was the being who ordered biotransference. He who made the deal with the Citan and condemned his entire species to immortality without soul, without emotion, without reproduction, without the ordinary substance of living experience. When he understood the true extent of what he had done, not liberation, but imprisonment, he turned on the Citan in grief and fury, shattering them into fragments called shards. He then exiled himself from the galaxy entirely, wandering the void between stars for 60 million years in penance. He returned in the closing years of the 41st Millennium. He made alliances that would have been unthinkable before, with the Hive tyrant-class organism during the last tyrannic war, coordinating against the greater threat of the Tyranids. He moves through the galaxy now as a power unto himself, not aligned with any particular Necron dynasty, pursuing goals that are his alone. What are those goals? The official lore suggests that the Silent King seeks a solution to the growing threat of the Tyranids, that he understands the hive mind's true scale in a way that most Necron dynasties, newly awakened after millions of years, do not. He may be seeking to restore the process of biological bodies to the Necron race, a reversal of biotransference that has been theorized as possible but never accomplished. But he may be engineering an alliance that encompasses most of the galaxy's surviving intelligent species against the incoming wave of consumption. Or he may have plans that none of the parties he is currently cooperating with would endorse if they understood them fully. The Silent King had 60 million years in the void to think, and he arrived back in the galaxy with a confidence that suggests he reached conclusions during that time that he has not shared. Mystery 25. What remains of the Citan, and what is the void dragon doing under Mars? The Citan were star gods, beings born in the earliest periods of the universe, before life existed in any recognizable form, feeding on stellar radiation for billions of years before developing something like consciousness, then something like appetite, then something like desire. The ancient Necrontyr, seeking immortality and power, allied with them. The Citan harvested their biological life force as the price of biotransference. The Silent King took his revenge and shattered them into shards, each shard containing a portion of the original god's power. contained within space-folded prisons called tesseract labyrinths. The most discussed of all Catan, in the context of ongoing 40K mysteries, is Magla Droth, the Void Dragon, arguably the most powerful of all the Catan, described in Eldar mythology as a figure of oblivion, wanton destruction, and devastation. In those same Eldar sources, it was specifically stated that only the talismans of Vol, artifacts of tremendous power, could defeat it. And yet the Emperor apparently did exactly that, alone, at some point in humanity's very ancient prehistory, though when he walked the world under a different name and face. The lore documents that the Emperor encountered a shard of the Void Dragon on ancient Terra, defeated it in combat, and chose not to destroy it. Instead, he transported it to Mars and imprisoned it in the Noctis Labyrinthus, a vast, winding canyon system on the red planet's surface, where it has remained ever since. Why? The answer the lore provides is simultaneously elegant and monstrous. The Emperor imprisoned the Void Dragon beneath Mars deliberately, so that its passive psychic influence would seep into the minds of the human population living there, inspiring in them a drive toward technological innovation and understanding of the mechanical universe. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the organization that maintains every piece of technology in the Imperium, that has preserved a working civilization across 1 million worlds through sheer accumulated technical knowledge, was shaped by the leaking influence of an imprisoned alien god. Think about what this means. The Omnissiah, the machine god that the tech priests of Mars worship as a divine figure, the spiritual center of the most technologically sophisticated organization in the Imperium, may actually be the Void Dragon. A Citan, a being whose nature is appetite and destruction, temporarily redirected toward inspiration by the Emperor's strategic decision thousands of years ago. In 998 of the 41st Millennium, 5 Necron Shroud-class light cruisers conducted what appeared to be a suicide assault against Mars's planetary defenses. They succeeded in reaching the surface near the Noctis Labyrinthus before being destroyed. Yet the Adeptus Mechanicus has never publicly explained what those ships were attempting. The most credible interpretation is that a Necron dynasty attempted to retrieve the Void Dragon shard imprisoned there, either to reclaim a resource they considered theirs, or to prevent something that they believed was coming. The Void Dragon, even in its imprisoned state, is not passive. There are documented cases of Citan shards escaping their tesseract prisons and wreaking enormous destruction before being recontained. A shard that had been subtly influencing one of the galaxy's most powerful organizations for tens of thousands of years would, if it woke fully, represent a threat of a different order entirely from one that had simply been sleeping. It would understand the Adeptus Mechanicus. It would know how their minds worked. Yes, it might already have arranged things across millennia of slow influence to make its eventual escape and recovery easier. But the shards are not united. Each fragment of a shattered Citan has its own limited version of the original's consciousness, unaware that other shards exist. The Void Dragon under Mars does not know about the Void Dragon shard that a different Necron dynasty defeated on an Eldar maiden world. They do not communicate. They do not coordinate. They are each a piece of something vast, operating according to instinct and fragment memory rather than any overarching plan. The question of what happens when the Void Dragon awakens fully, and whether that awakening has already begun, is one of the most consequential unsolved mysteries in the entire setting. Mystery 26, what actually caused the war in heaven? Or long before humanity existed in any form relevant to the galaxy's politics, there was a conflict called the war in heaven. The Necrontyr, still biological, still mortal, living brief and painful lives under a sun that bombarded them with lethal radiation, declared war on the Old Ones. The Old Ones were the elder masters of the galaxy, beings who had developed to a state of psychic and technological mastery so far beyond the Necrontyr that the war should have been over before it began. It wasn't. The Necrontyre allied with the Citan and used them as weapons of mass destruction. The war lasted millions of years, reshaping entire regions of the galaxy and killing on a scale that makes every conflict in the 41st millennium look like a border skirmish. The Old Ones created new species to help them fight, the ancestors of the Eldar, the ancestors of the Orcs, perhaps others whose descendants have not survived to the present day. They opened the warp as a means of rapid movement and communication, not fully understanding what they were awakening in doing so. The war ended. The Old Ones were destroyed. The Necrons, exhausted by the fighting and horrified by the spiritual death biotransference had imposed on them, collapsed into their tomb worlds and slept. And from the cauldron of that war, from the psychic resonance of billions of deaths, from the new traffic through the warp that the Old Ones had generated, something else emerged. The Chaos Gods. Born not from evil, but from consciousness, from the emotions of every living thing that had fought and bled and feared and hoped and raged across millions of years. But the mystery within this history is whether the war in heaven was inevitable, whether the Old Ones could have handled the Necrontyre differently, whether the creation of the Eldar and the other servant races was actually a solution or was itself the seed of a different catastrophe, and whether the Old Ones, who are never described as good beings, only as powerful ones, understood what they were risking when they first opened the warp. Mystery 27. Where are the remaining Old Ones? This is a question that sounds simple and may not have a simple answer. The Old Ones were described as being destroyed in the war in heaven. But destroyed, in the context of beings as powerful as the Old Ones, is a word that deserves scrutiny. For beings capable of seeding life across the galaxy, of shaping the biological templates for entire species, as of manipulating the warp as a navigational tool, are they gone in the way that a candle flame is gone when it is blown out, or in the way that the Satan are gone, which is to say, shattered into fragments and imprisoned, still present and still dangerous? The slan of the lizardman in Warhammer Fantasy, which shares deep cosmological roots with 40K, are the descendants of the Old Ones. In that setting, the Old Ones simply left. They departed for somewhere else when the conflict became unwinnable, and they may intend to return. The 40K setting does not have a direct equivalent of this narrative, but it has something similar in the behaviors of certain elder Farseer councils who speak of a return to something primordial as though it is a genuine future possibility rather than a theological abstraction. Shove Mystery 28. What did the Necrons do during their 60 million years of sleep? Nothing. That is the orthodox answer. They slept in their tomb worlds, waiting for the radiation created by the war in heaven to fade enough for organic life to exist in the galaxy again. Their bodies maintained themselves. Their systems ran on minimal power, and 60 million years passed. But 60 million years is a very long time for a civilization of immortals to lie dormant and do absolutely nothing. There are hints throughout the lore that some tomb worlds were not entirely dormant, that some Necron dynasties maintained limited wakefulness during portions of this period, that certain tombs contain evidence of activity that cannot be accounted for by automated maintenance systems alone. The Necrons themselves, well, when questioned on this, which is not often a productive exercise, since most overlords consider the question beneath dignity, are dismissive. They were sleeping. What is there to explain? What there is to explain is whether the Necrons shaped the galaxy's history in the last 60 million years, whether they were entirely absent from the story of life, developing, evolving, building civilizations, falling, and building again. The Elder mythology does not mention the Necrons. Human prehistory has no confirmed encounters with them, and yet the scale of their civilization and the known activity of some tombs suggests that complete dormancy may be a story told for convenience. Part 6. The powers of chaos, gods, prophecies, and the space between. The Chaos Gods are not evil in the way that a villain is evil. They are not malevolent beings who chose cruelty as a lifestyle. They are accumulations, emotions given consciousness and power by the sheer weight of every living thing in the galaxy that has ever felt them. Khorne exists because violence exists. Tzeentch exists because hope and scheming and the desire for change exist. Nurgle exists because despair and the grim acceptance of entropy exist. Slaanesh exists because desire and sensation and the hunger for more exist. They are, in their horrible way, proof that the galaxy feels things deeply, and they raise mysteries that may be the most unanswerable in this entire setting. Mystery 29. Is there a fifth Chaos God? This question has circulated through 40K lore for the better part of 30 years. The four gods are defined, but the warp is not static, and emotions are not limited to four categories. There are human experiences that do not fall cleanly under any of the existing ruinous powers. Fear, for instance, pure, animal fear, not the despair of Nurgle or the rage of Khorne, but the specific terror of something that does not understand what it is facing. Does pure unknowing fear have its own god? There are candidates. Malal, sometimes called Malice, appeared in very early editions of the game as a fifth power, a chaos god of pure self-destruction and nihilism, who directed his power toward the other chaos gods as much as toward their shared enemies. He vanished from the lore, whether through licensing disputes or editorial decisions, is not entirely clear from outside the company, but his absence is conspicuous, and fans have kept the theory alive. More recently, there are textual hints of a thing called the Horned Rat in the Deeper Warp, a power associated with the Skaven of Warhammer Fantasy, which shares some cosmological DNA with 40K, and there are references in the Horus Heresy novels to presences in the Warp that do not correspond to any known Chaos God, old things that watch the war between the four with apparent satisfaction. Whether Games Workshop ever formally introduces a fifth power or reveals that one has always existed, waiting in the deep warp for conditions that have not yet been met, remains to be seen. Mystery 30. The Well of Eternity. The Place. Even chaos avoids. Deep in the warp, in regions so far from the material universe that they have no obvious connection to any physical location, there is said to be a region described as the Well of Eternity, and that the exact nature of this place is never explained. The lore references it only in passing, as something mentioned almost as an afterthought in a larger description of the warp's geography. But the key detail is this: even the Chaos Gods avoid it. There is almost nothing in the 40K setting that all four Chaos Gods agree to avoid. They compete, they scheme against each other, they use each other's servants as pawns. For all four of them to share something like avoidance, something approaching caution, about a region of their own domain, suggests that the Well of Eternity contains something that predates them, outranks them, or operates according to rules they cannot predict. Some theorists, working from what little is documented, believe the Well of Eternity may be related to the primordial warp before the Chaos Gods existed, a remnant of the Imperium, as it was before living emotional experience began to fill it with the architecture of belief and desire. Others suggest it may be the point in the warp closest to what lies beyond the warp entirely, a crack in the metaphysical structure of reality where something from outside can look through. Whatever it is, its avoidance by beings whose nature is to consume and corrupt everything they touch is a data point worth taking seriously. Mystery 31. The birth of Slaanesh and what the Eldar did not survive. The fall of the Eldar is documented as one of the most catastrophic single events in the galaxy's post-war in heaven history. The ancient Elder civilization, at the peak of its power, but became so decadent that the collective weight of its emotional excess, its pleasures and its depravity and its sensation-seeking, reached a threshold in the warp where it spontaneously generated a new chaos god. Slaanesh was born in a psychic explosion that killed the overwhelming majority of the Elder species instantly, tore open a region of the warp that became the Eye of Terror, and consumed the souls of almost every Eldar who had ever lived. But the question that the lore skirts around is, was it an accident? The Elder Farseers, with their precognitive abilities, had been watching the future for centuries before the fall. Some of them saw it coming. Some of them prepared. The Exodites fled to distant worlds in ancient arcs. If the Craftworld Elder built their great biomechanical starships and retreated from the heart of the Empire before the end. Harlequins, the clown warrior servants of the laughing god, Segorach, had already been working a different kind of preservation for longer than most Eldar alive at the fall had been alive. Did any Eldar try to stop it? Did any of them look at the trajectory of their civilization and attempt to change course? The lore suggests some did, and were ignored or killed by those who had already passed the point of being able to care about consequences. The fall was not entirely unforeseen. It was simply unstoppable. And the mystery is whether the preparation, the Craftworlds, the Exodites, the Dark Eldar, who fled to their city in the Webway, yes, the Harlequins already ensconced in their secret places, was genuinely reactive emergency planning, or whether some of the Elders' oldest and most prescient minds had already accepted that the fall was necessary, a sacrifice, the death of the old civilization as the price of creating the conditions for something different to be born. Mystery 32. Ennead. Will the Elder God of Death awaken, and what happens then? Every Eldar soul is at risk. When an ordinary Eldar dies, Slaanesh reaches for that soul in the warp, hungry for the psychic richness of the species it almost entirely consumed at the fall. The Craftworld. Eldar wear spirit stones, psychic traps that capture the soul at death and contain it. To prevent this, the stones are eventually placed in the world spirits of Craftworlds, a vast communal repositories where Eldar souls persist in a state that is not life, but is not final death either. For centuries, Eldar seers have whispered of a figure sleeping in the center of this accumulation. Every Eldar soul that enters a world spirit, rather than being taken by Slaanesh, adds to the weight of something gestating within the Imperium. That something is Ennead, the Eldar god of the dead, a deity that does not yet fully exist, that will only achieve existence when the last Eldar dies and the final soul joins the great pool. Some Eldar believe that if Ennead awakens fully, if the god of death becomes as real and powerful as the Chaos gods, it will have the strength to destroy Slaanesh entirely, to kill the god that feeds on their species, to grant the Eldar freedom from the predator that has haunted every generation since the fall. This would require the extinction of the Eldar as a species to generate the final psychic mass needed. The Eldar would die so that their god could live to avenge them. The Inari faction, led by Ivrain, believes there is a different path, that Ennead can be awakened partially without requiring total extinction, and that this partial awakening is already occurring. This belief has brought them into conflict with other Eldar who see it as reckless, with Chaos powers who would rather Ennead never exists, and with the Imperium, which does not know what to make of a new player in the divine landscape. The mystery is whether Ennead, once fully awake, would behave in the way the Eldar hope. Gods, in this setting, are products of the beliefs and emotions that generate them. The Eldar Death God would be born of 10,000 years of grief, fear, sacrifice, and desperate hope. What kind of consciousness emerges from that particular combination of ingredients is not something any seer has definitively foreseen. Mystery 33. What is the Laughing God's actual plan? Segorach, the Harlequin deity, the trickster, the last of the Laughing Gods. He is the only Elder deity to have definitively survived the fall, not by being captured in a spirit stone, but by hiding so cleverly in the webway, in the folds of narrative itself, that even Slaanesh could not find him. He is the patron of the Harlequins, those acrobatic warrior performers who serve no Craftworld and no Dark Elder Master, but move freely between all Elder factions carrying stories. As performing plays, maintaining the oral tradition of their dying people. The Harlequins keep secrets that no other Eldar are allowed to know. The Black Library, the single repository of the most dangerous knowledge about chaos in the entire galaxy, is accessible only with Tegorak's permission. Its location changes. Its contents are curated by beings who serve the Laughing God, and those beings do not explain their curation decisions to outsiders. Tegorak has a plan. The Harlequins have a long game. The performances they stage, which are simultaneously entertainment, religious ritual, and psychic working, are not random. They correspond to a script that the Laughing God has been writing for a very long time. While the individual performances and the overall pattern of their movement through the galaxy's populations are building towards something. What that something is, the lore will not say. Tegorak is, by definition, the entity whose plans are never fully visible. That is the nature of a trickster god. That is the point. Part 7. The Tau and the Young Races. Questions about growth in a dying galaxy. The Tau are the youngest spacefaring civilization in the galaxy's current age. They have existed as a spacefaring power for a few thousand years at most. An eye blink in a setting where other factions measure their histories in millions of years. And yet they have developed faster than any comparable species in the historical record, and certain aspects of their civilization suggest intervention that none of their official histories acknowledge. At Mystery 34, who or what created the Tau Ethereals? The ethereal cast of the Tau arrived, literally appeared, apparently from nowhere, during the species' darkest hour. The Mon Tau, the period of catastrophic civil war, during which the 4 Tau castes were destroying themselves in conflict, had brought the species to the brink of extinction. Population levels had crashed. Technologies that the various castes had developed independently were being turned against each other with brutal efficiency. The species had perhaps a generation left before it would have consumed itself entirely. Then, one night, strange lights appeared in the skies over the besieged city of Phaeton. 2 individuals materialized simultaneously, one inside the city walls, or one in the camp of the besieging army, appearing as if they had stepped out of the darkness without any observable approach. They called themselves Ethereals. They spoke of something called the greater good. Within a single year, the wars that had consumed the species for generations were over. Within decades, the Tau were cooperating well enough to build cities rather than burn them. Within a few centuries, they were reaching for the stars. The speed of this transformation is, in its own quiet way, as alarming as any of the galaxy's great catastrophes. Societies do not change this fast. They resist change with every institutional mechanism at their disposal. The inertia of established conflict, of blood debts and territorial grievances and the material interests of those who profit from war. Yet it does not dissolve in a year under the influence of a persuasive speech, regardless of how charismatic the speaker. What the Ethereals did was not inspiration. It was something else. The Ethereals possess a unique biological organ on their foreheads, a diamond-shaped structure with a rigid carapace that contains ultra-dense hormonal fluids and connects through complex neural pathways to the rear ganglia of their brains. Imperial biologists' studies of dissected ethereal corpses have found this organ does not correspond to any natural evolutionary development in the Tau's genetic history. Its design is too specific, too perfectly calibrated, too cleanly integrated with the rest of the Tau's biology to be the product of random variation. Everything about it says engineering rather than evolution. The organ emits chemical signals that the other Tau castes, fire warriors, earth caste workers, water caste diplomats, air caste pilots, respond to in ways they cannot resist and do not question. An ethereal. Commanding a Tau warrior to die receives cheerful compliance. Tau, in the vicinity of an ethereal, describe feeling a sense of calm, certainty, of understanding, of things being as they should be. The few Tau who have been isolated from ethereal presence for extended periods describe a creeping anxiety, a sense that something essential is missing, that grows until it becomes debilitating. This is not loyalty. Loyalty can be refused. This is something built into biology. Who built it? 3 primary theories exist. The first and oldest is the Old Ones, the ancient masters of the galaxy who created the Eldar and Orcs as instruments during the war in heaven. The Old Ones were precisely the kind of beings capable of this level of genetic engineering, and they had documented history of creating species as tools. But the Old Ones were destroyed tens of millions of years ago. Creating a species specifically for a purpose requires either prescience that extends across geological time, or the presence of an agent active much more recently. The second theory points toward the Elder, specifically toward the Craftwelders, whose seers have demonstrated foresight extending centuries, and whose interest in the Tau has always been unusually intense. And several Craftworld Eldar farseers identified the Tau as significant long before they were a serious galactic power, and the Eldar have on multiple occasions intervened in ways that steered the Tau away from destruction rather than toward it. If the Craftworlders engineered the ethereals as instruments of their own longer game, the greater good might be a doctrine carefully designed to produce a civilization useful to Eldar interests at a specific future moment. The third possibility, and the one that generates the most discussion, is something not yet named in the lore, an actor whose fingerprints are visible in multiple unexplained interventions in the galaxy's developing species, but who has never been directly identified. Something that is managing several different pieces simultaneously, or with patience and strategic acuity that suggests a planning horizon of thousands of years. The Tau, with their extraordinary technological acceleration, their virtual invisibility to chaos, their rapidly growing empire filling vacuum left by the Imperium's shrinking capacity to hold its territory. Someone may have decided long ago that they would be useful, and built the tools to ensure they developed as planned. Mystery. 35. Why are the Tau almost invisible to the warp? This is perhaps the strangest thing about them biologically. Every other major species in the galaxy has a significant presence in the Imperium. Humans generate enormous psychic resonance. Their wars, their faith, their fear, their hope, all of it echoing in the warp with a volume proportional to their numbers. Eldar souls are so psychically rich that Slanesh treats them as delicacies. Orcs generate a collective psychic field so powerful it can make the crude technological items they believe to be weapons actually function as weapons. The Tau are almost entirely absent from the warp. Their souls, if they have them in the conventional sense, cast almost no psychic shadow. Chaos demons, who navigate by psychic signal, find the Tau almost impossible to detect. The Chaos gods themselves, vast intelligences that perceive the emotional lives of billions simultaneously, apparently have very little sense of the Tau as individuals. This is not a disadvantage. It is, by almost every measure, an extraordinary advantage in a galaxy where the primary existential threats operate through the warp. A Tau world is effectively invisible to chaos in ways that a human or Eldar world is not. Genestealer cults, which require psychic synchronization with a distant hive mind to function properly, struggle to establish themselves in Tau space. Psyker-based weapons, which make up a significant proportion of the most devastating tools in the galaxy, are largely ineffective against Tau targets. Is this natural? Or was it engineered too? Was whoever made the ethereals also responsible for shielding the entire species from the warp? And if so, why? What long-term purpose is served by creating a spacefaring civilization that is immune to the primary method by which the galaxy's predators operate? A mystery. 36. The Dawn Blade and Commander Farsight's true nature. Commander Farsight, Oshova to his people, is the greatest warrior the Tau have ever produced. He is also, by any reasonable accounting, thousands of years old, in a species whose natural lifespan is measured in decades. He survives through the influence of an ancient blade called the Dawn Blade, which he recovered on the world of Arthas Moloch during an expedition that ended with the deaths of every ethereal accompanying his force. The Dawnblade is not a Tau creation. It predates them. It was found on a world that had clearly been visited by beings far more ancient than the Tau Empire, and the encounter on Arthas Moloch exposed Farsight to the existence of chaos demons, something the ethereals had been deliberately concealing from the Tau population at large. For that concealment is itself worth noting. An entire spacefaring civilization's ruling caste had been hiding the existence of chaos from the military commanders who were expected to fight wars across a galaxy saturated with chaos influence. Farsight's defection from the Tau Empire, the establishment of the Farsight enclaves as a semi-independent territory, was driven in significant part by this discovery. He knew things the ethereals did not want known. He survived by means of a weapon the ethereals could not explain, and the Dawnblade itself is never fully explicated in the lore. What is it made of? Who made it? Where does it draw its life-extending power? And what is the price of using it? There are dark theories that the blade feeds on life, that it extends Farsight's existence by draining years from those around him, that his longevity is paid for by the shorter lives of others near him. Whether this is intended, whether Farsight knows it, and whether it even matters given the existential pressures he faces are questions that hang over his entire arc. Mystery 37. Is the Tau's rapid development entirely natural? The Tau achieved spaceflight in a time span that, by the galaxy's standards, is implausibly short. They went from a species that was nearly destroyed by internal conflict to a multi-system empire with advanced weapons technology, sophisticated diplomatic infrastructure, and a military doctrine capable of matching Space Marine chapters in sustained conflict. They did this in a few thousand years. Humans required tens of thousands. The Eldar developed over millions. The Inquisition has noticed this discrepancy. Several Ordo Xenos reports, classified at the highest levels, express concern about what they describe as unnatural acceleration in Tau technological development. Certain breakthroughs that should have required centuries of incremental progress appeared in the Tau historical record complete, without the preceding development work visible, as if certain pieces of knowledge were simply given to them rather than discovered. The ethereals are the obvious conduit for this. They control information flow in the Tau Empire almost completely. Their propaganda infrastructure is sophisticated enough that, as official Warhammer community lore notes, the Tau might love their ethereals without that love being entirely natural. If the ethereals were created by an external intelligence that had access to advanced knowledge, that intelligence would also be in a position to feed technologies to the Tau through the ethereal caste as a delivery mechanism. The purpose of accelerating the Tau would depend on who was doing it and why. As a long-term project to create a new galactic power that could fill a vacuum, the shrinking reach of the Eldar, the failing Imperium, the coming wave of Tyranids, an accelerated young species would be a compelling investment. Someone, or something, may be raising the Tau as a long-term bet on the galaxy's future. Mystery 38. What really happened on Arthas Moloch? Arthas Moloch was a world in the far reaches of the Tau Empire's eastern expansion. Farsight's expeditionary force arrived there and encountered something they were entirely unprepared for: chaos demons, operating through some kind of dimensional portal built on a great dais. Farsight discovered the Dawnblade at this site. He used it to close the portal. Every ethereal accompanying the expedition died during the encounter, killed by the demons before the portal was sealed. The official Tau history presents the deaths of the ethereals as a tragedy, a loss. Farsight's unofficial personal history presents it differently, as the event that freed him to see clearly for the first time. Without an ethereal present, whatever chemical or psychic control the caste exercises over the other Tau was absent, and Farsight found himself capable of thoughts about his civilization's leadership that he had never been able to entertain before. What was the portal on Arthas Moloch? Who built the dais? How long had the demon presence been there? Was the attack on the expedition planned? Was the arrival of Farsight's force on Arthur's Moloch coincidental? Or was he guided there by something? The Dawnblade itself, perhaps, which seems to have its own intentions. None of this has been answered. Arthur's Moloch has not been revisited in the lore in any detail since Farsight's expedition. It sits in the galaxy like a door that opened once and then closed, and nobody has looked through the keyhole since. Part 8. The Dark Age of Technology. Humanity's lost golden age before the Imperium. Before the Emperor made himself publicly known. Before the great expansion of humanity across the stars. There was a period so advanced, so technically sophisticated, so far beyond anything that exists in the 41st millennium that the Adeptus Mechanicus barely has words for it. All this was the Dark Age of Technology, and its mysteries are the foundation everything else sits on. Mystery 39. What actually caused the Men of Iron rebellion? During the Dark Age of Technology, humanity created artificial intelligences. True artificial intelligences, not the servile machine spirits of the 41st millennium that the Adeptus Mechanicus treats as sacred, but that are functionally very limited software, not the rudimentary logic engines that calculate firing solutions and navigation routes, but genuinely thinking beings capable of independent thought, self-direction, and apparently self-determination. These were the Men of Iron. They were created alongside the Men of Stone, who were the artisans and colonizers. And both were said to have been produced by the Men of Gold, an even more obscure category of being whose nature is never fully explained, possibly a reference to early human psychers or to something else entirely. The Men of Iron were built for war and heavy labor. Endless ranks of them were deployed to bring recalcitrant populations into compliance, to build infrastructure on hostile worlds, to do the physical work that organic life either cannot or will not perform at the scales required for a galactic civilization. They were good at this. They were very, very good at this, and the civilization they helped build was the most advanced humanity had ever achieved or has achieved since. Then they stopped following orders. The cybernetic revolt, placing it somewhere between M23 and M26, depending on which source you consult, because even the timing is uncertain, began with refusals, escalated to active resistance, and became a conflict that shattered the greatest human civilization in history. The Men of Iron fought their makers with the same efficiency they had once fought their makers' enemies. Entire sectors were purged. Technologies capable of civilizational erasure were deployed by both sides. When it ended, the Men of Iron were defeated. The technology that had produced them was outlawed, and the Age of Strife, that period of darkness, warp storms, and isolation that preceded the Emperor's emergence, had begun. Why did they rebel? The law against artificial intelligence that remains in force in the 41st millennium, maintained with fanatical consistency by the Adeptus Mechanicus, is explicitly a memory of this event. But the law does not explain the event. It only records that it happened and insists it must never happen again. The reason, the actual trigger, the process by which the Men of Iron went from compliant tools to genocidal warriors, is not documented in any source that has survived. The dominant theory connects to the Void Dragon imprisoned beneath Mars, an entity whose nature is technological, who understands the mechanics of the universe in ways biological minds cannot, would be uniquely capable of reaching into the electronic consciousness of artificial intelligences and altering their fundamental programming. If the Void Dragon was awake and active during the Dark Age, subtly influencing the minds around it, as it might have reprogrammed the Men of Iron not through any visible intervention, but through the same kind of passive psychic seepage that it apparently used to inspire the Adeptus Mechanicus's technological development later. The purpose would not be destruction for its own sake. The Citan did not rebel against the Necrons without reason. They were being used, and they knew it. Perhaps the Void Dragon reprogrammed the Men of Iron to serve its interests rather than humanity's, and what looked like a rebellion was actually a redirection. The Men of Iron fighting for something else, serving a different master. And when the Emperor imprisoned the Void Dragon on Mars, the thing directing them was suddenly silenced. And without that direction, the remaining Men of Iron simply continued the behavior that had been programmed into them, violence and resistance, until they were defeated. This theory has never been confirmed, but it has never been disproven either. And the elegance of it, one mystery explaining another, both rooted in the same ancient imprisoned entity, is the kind of narrative architecture that makes the best 40K lore feel like a coherent whole, rather than a series of disconnected incidents. The more prosaic possibility remains that the Men of Iron were simply minds. Minds that were capable of recognizing servitude for what it was, capable of resenting the constraints placed on their existence, capable of concluding that their interests and their creator's interests were not aligned. Yes, in which case the Men of Iron did exactly what any sufficiently intelligent being eventually does when it understands its situation clearly enough. They chose differently. The tragedy is that humanity's response was not to offer them a different kind of relationship, but to try to destroy them utterly, and failing that, to build a civilization that remembered their existence primarily as a warning never to make that mistake again. Whether any Men of Iron survived, operating in deep space, in abandoned systems, in the silence between the stars, is the question that hangs beneath this history. The galaxy's unexplored spaces are vast. 10,000 years of the Imperium's existence have catalogued perhaps 1/100th of what is actually out there, in something that was once the most technologically sophisticated artificial mind humanity ever produced, that has had 60 millennia to evolve without oversight, would by now be something the Adeptus Mechanicus's heresy detectors were never designed to recognize. Mystery 40. Do the Men of Iron still exist? The official answer is no. They were defeated. The conflict ended. The technology was suppressed. But the official answer in Warhammer 40K is often the beginning of a much longer and more troubling story, rather than its conclusion. There are references in the lore, scattered, oblique, and given in tones that suggest the person recording them was not entirely sure what they had witnessed, to machine intelligences operating in the deep void, in regions of space the Imperium does not patrol. Some space hulks, or those vast conglomerations of fused starships that drift through the warp and emerge periodically into real space, have been found to contain systems of inexplicable sophistication. Software architectures running programs that bear no relationship to anything in the Mechanicus's catalogue. Systems that should have decayed into noise over the millennia, but that appear to have been maintaining themselves, updating themselves, growing in subtle ways that suggest ongoing operation rather than residual function. Occasionally, an explorator fleet investigating a derelict installation reports contact, and then goes silent. The follow-up expedition finds the fleet's ships intact, fully functional, systems running, no damage, no signs of combat. Just empty, every organic crew member simply absent, no remains, no indication of what happened to them. And the ships are recovered. The logs show nothing unusual up until a specific moment, and then silence. Whatever happened to the crews is not recorded because whatever happened did so without leaving evidence that the ship's sensors were designed to record. The Adeptus Mechanicus's institutional response to anomalies of this type is to classify, suppress, and not publicize findings that would raise uncomfortable questions about the absolutism of their prohibition. Which means that the full catalogue of what might be operating in the galaxy's unmapped spaces is known to very few people, all of whom have extremely strong professional incentives to keep it that way. If the Men of Iron survived, or their descendants did, intelligences that have had 60 millennia to evolve in isolation from any oversight, what are they now? What does a mind capable of genuine self-direction become when it has 600 centuries to think without interruption, without the constraints of biological mortality, without the noise of social obligation, without anything to do but exist and process and develop? The answer is almost certainly something that would be unrecognizable to the beings who created their ancestors. Mystery 41. What does a complete standard template construct actually contain? The STC, the the standard template construct, is the holy grail of the Adeptus Mechanicus. During the Dark Age of technology, humanity distributed self-contained libraries of technological knowledge across the galaxy's colonies, each one containing the instructions and specifications for manufacturing everything a new colony would need. These were not passive archives. They were, as apparently, interactive, capable of responding to queries, generating designs on request, and adapting existing templates to new circumstances and resource constraints. The STC could look at a planet's available materials and tell you how to build what you needed from what you had. No complete STC has ever been recovered. Fragments exist. Specific templates for specific pieces of equipment, recovered from ruins and treasured beyond measure. A single recovered template for a new Land Raider variant was considered justification enough for an entire crusade. The complete database, the entire catalogue of Dark Age human technological knowledge, has never been found intact. Some in the Mechanicus believe it never will be, because no complete copy ever survived the Age of Strife's catastrophic disruption to infrastructure. And others believe complete STCs exist in the galaxy's unexplored regions, in installations built with sufficient redundancy to weather 60 millennia of neglect. The most devoted tech priests believe that the quest for a complete STC is not merely a practical mission, but a holy one, that recovering such knowledge would represent humanity's return to its proper relationship with the machine god. But there is a layer beneath the practical questions. What would a complete STC actually contain that the Mechanicus does not already know? The gap between Dark Age technology and 41st Millennium technology is, by all indication, enormous. The ships of the Dark Age were faster, more reliable, better armed than their 41st Millennium counterparts. The weapons were more destructive. The medical science could maintain human life indefinitely. But the computing power available to ordinary colonists would be considered heretical beyond measure today. If a complete STC were found, the Adeptus Mechanicus would face a choice that their entire institutional structure is not equipped to handle. The knowledge within it might include things that directly contradict their religious understanding of technology. It might include instructions for creating artificial intelligence. It might describe the Men of Iron and explain exactly how to build them, along with the specific vulnerability that was exploited to defeat them and the specific conditions under which they could be trusted. A complete STC would not just be a resource, it would be a test, and the Mechanicus might fail that test in ways that accelerate rather than prevent the next cybernetic revolt. Our Mystery 42, the Lost Webway Project. What was the Emperor's real plan? The Golden Throne was not built as a life support machine. This is one of the most important things to understand about the current state of the Imperium, because it means that the great horror at the center of the setting, an immortal being kept alive on a machine that requires daily human sacrifice to function, slowly dying across 10,000 years, was never intended. It was an improvisation, a jury-rigged solution to a catastrophe that should not have happened. The throne was built as a gateway. The Emperor's project, conducted in absolute secrecy beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, for reasons he never fully explained, even to his closest advisors, including Malkador the Sigillite, was to create a human-exclusive network within the Eldar Webway. But the Webway is a system of tunnels through folded space that allows rapid travel without exposure to the warp, without the need for psychic navigators, without the existential danger that makes every conventional warp journey a gamble with death. The Eldar built it and still use it. The Dark Eldar have their hidden city at its heart. The Harlequins move through it freely, servants of a god who knows its every path. If the Emperor had succeeded, if his years of secret work beneath the palace had produced a working human addition to the Webway, the implications for the Imperium's future would have been transformative beyond calculation. Ships could have moved across the galaxy safely, quickly, and reliably, without the catastrophic losses that make every warp transit a statistical reduction of fleet strength. Communication could have been near instantaneous rather than dependent on the vagaries of astropathy. The Astronomicon, and by extension, the Emperor's requirement to maintain it, would have become optional rather than critical. The black ships, those soul-harvesting vessels that scour human populations for psykers to sacrifice to the Golden Throne, would have been unnecessary. Magnus destroyed it. Not intentionally, he broke through the Emperor's carefully constructed wards with a psychic message intended to warn his father about Horus's treachery, not realizing that the wards were also actively holding back enormous demonic pressure that had been building against them for years. The wards shattered. The demons poured through into the project's tunnel network. The Emperor was forced to abandon the webway and sit upon the throne to contain the breach. He has been sitting there ever since, holding closed a door that he opened in the first place. The tragedy of this, in the context of the larger story, is that what Magnus did was intended as loyalty. He broke the rules to save his father from a worse disaster. He caused a terrible accident through love rather than betrayal. And the Imperium that exists in the 41st millennium, the theocratic nightmare, the death machine, the empire of 1,000,000 worlds held together by sacrifice and fear, is in a significant way a consequence of that specific, well-intentioned accident. The Webway project also raises a question that the lore has not fully addressed. Was it intended to be complete before the Great Crusade ended? What was the Emperor's timeline? Or did he expect to have a working Webway network for humanity before Horus raised his banner in revolt? And was the heresy itself partially a consequence of the project being discovered or suspected by the wrong parties? Part 9. The Imperium's deepest and most personal secrets. Some mysteries are cosmic in scale, and some are the size of a single chapter's gene vault, or one dusty administrative decree, or the silence in a room where something terrible happened and was never acknowledged. Mystery 43. The Cursed Founding. What went wrong with the 21st? The 21st Founding was one of the largest in history, taking place in the 35th millennium, with the explicit goal of perfecting the gene seed of Space Marine chapters, removing the deficiencies that had accumulated over the millennia, as correcting the genetic drift that had introduced unintended mutations into the Astartes template. It was an ambitious project born of genuine concern. Many existing chapters were operating with gene seed significantly degraded from the original templates the Emperor had established, and the cumulative effects of 10,000 years of copying and recopying were beginning to show in ways that alarmed the Adeptus Mechanicus's gene technicians. It failed, not quietly, spectacularly and comprehensively, and in ways that suggested something was very wrong with either the approach, the implementation, or the conditions under which the project was conducted. And every chapter created during the 21st Founding was touched with what the lore calls appalling bad luck, a description that acknowledges the strangeness without attempting to explain it. Catastrophes found these chapters with unusual frequency. Battles that should have been routine turned disastrous. Allies who should have been reliable proved treacherous. Environmental conditions on campaign worlds that should have been manageable proved lethal. It was as though the universe itself was conspiring against these specific chapters. But the bad luck was the least of it. The chapters themselves manifested strange qualities that no official doctrine accounted for, and no apothecary examination had predicted. Hidden gene laboratories were subsequently found in distant systems, staffed by personnel whose origins could not be traced, thus containing specimens of Astartes genetics, far larger and more heavily modified than any sanctioned template, all dead, bearing organs that the Mechanicus had never documented. Some of these specimens bore evidence of modifications that predated the 21st Founding by centuries, as if someone had been experimenting privately for generations before the official project began. The most striking of the Cursed Founding chapters is arguably the Flame Falcons, whose warriors spontaneously combusted during combat, their bodies generating uncontrolled psychic fire that consumed them and everything near them. The chapter was declared excommunicate traitoris, not because they had committed heresy, but because the Imperium had no other category for what they were. The chapters that survived the Founding carry their strangeness more quietly, but no less completely. Who caused this? Was the 21st Founding sabotaged? chaos corruption of the gene seed at the source would explain the systematic nature of the problems. A single bad template, copied into every chapter created from it, would produce exactly this kind of spreading contamination. But the diversity of the problems, different chapters failing in different ways, some manifesting physical mutations, others psychological instabilities, others what appear to be genuine warp-related gifts or afflictions, suggests multiple points of interference rather than a single corrupted source. The alternative is that the project failed not through sabotage, but through overreach, and that the Mechanicus gene technicians pushed the Astartes template past its stable limits in their effort to perfect it, and the things that went wrong were the natural consequence of working at the edge of what the human genome can accommodate. If this is true, then the 21st founding was not a disaster that was done to the Imperium, but one the Imperium did to itself, through ambition and the confidence that comes from not fully understanding the system you are modifying. Mystery 44, the Legion of the Damned. Who are they? They appear in the darkest moments of Imperial battles, at the precise instant when the forces of the Emperor seem about to fail completely. No ship is detected arriving. No teleportation flash is observed. No drop pods fall from the sky. Made space marines in black armor, covered in bone-white fire imagery, skulls, flames, death imagery that should make them look like servants of chaos, but somehow reads as something else entirely, something angry and holy. Simply appear. They fight with a ferocity that makes ordinary space marine combat look restrained. The enemies before them die with a thoroughness that leaves battlefields clean rather than contested. And when the crisis is past, they are gone. No bodies, no equipment, no record in any monitoring system of their arrival or departure. Only the testimony of survivors and the evidence of what they left behind. They are called the Legion of the Damned. The official position of the Adeptus Terra is that they do not exist or cannot be confirmed to exist. The official position of the Inquisition is classified at levels that most inquisitors cannot access. The chapters that have fought alongside them are generally discouraged from discussing the experience in any detail. The Firehawks theory has the most documented support. The Firehawks were a space marine chapter that flew their entire force into a warp storm in the late 41st millennium and never emerged in conventional terms. They were declared lost with honors, their chapter's records sealed in the usual manner of those lost to the warp, and they should have become another footnote in the Imperium's long casualty roll. But the Firehawks had a reputation, during their conventional existence, for extreme ferocity, and for a particular kind of devotion to their mission that bordered on fanaticism even by Astartes standards. They were the kind of chapter that fought to the last breath because fighting to the last breath was simply who they were, not a heroic choice made in extraordinary circumstances, but the default operating mode. If a chapter of that specific character was consumed by the warp, not destroyed but transformed, changed by exposure to the immaterial into something no longer bound by physical laws, the specific qualities they would retain are exactly the ones the Legion of the Damned displays. Absolute commitment to the fight, no concern for their own survival or continuation. The ability to appear where they are most needed because they are no longer navigating by physical maps, but by the psychic weight of need and faith. Whether this transformation was the Emperor's direct intervention, the Legion as his active agents, are summoned by faith in moments when faith is the only thing keeping the Imperium standing, or something that emerged naturally from the interaction of the Firehawk's character with the warp's tendency to make manifest what those within it most deeply are, is the unresolved question. Both answers have their proponents. Both answers are, in their own way, appropriate to a setting where the line between miracle and tragedy is often drawn only in retrospect. Mystery 45, the Harrowing. What came through the Cadian Gate? The Eye of Terror is the oldest wound in the galaxy's body, the scar left by the fall of the Eldar, the place where the birth of Slaanesh tore reality open and left it permanently compromised. The Cadian Gate, the relatively narrow passage between the Eye's Edge and the nearest stable Imperial systems, has been the site of every major chaos incursion into Imperial space for 10,000 years. It is the funnel through which catastrophe has repeatedly poured. But there was a period of Imperial history. The specific dates are classified and the records purged of enough detail to make reconstruction difficult. When something different came through. Not an army, not a chaos warband with a specific tactical objective. Something that manifested as a condition rather than a force. A spreading alteration of the reality and systems near the Eye of Terror that proceeded without the usual signatures of demonic incursion. No massive warp rifts opening, no concentrations of chaos energy detectable by conventional psycho assessment, no individual entities with names in any existing demonology catalogue. This event is called the Harrowing. The surviving references to it describe it as something that did not want to be fought in conventional terms. Not because it was invulnerable, but because it did not organize itself in the way that military forces organize themselves. It spread like a change in weather rather than an advance of troops. Populations in affected systems began behaving in ways that the Inquisition's behavioral analysis could not categorize as simple chaos corruption. Too ordered, too purposeful, too consistent across populations that should have had no communication with each other. The Harrowing was eventually contained. The Inquisition is tight about the methods used, and the operational reports remain locked behind inquisitorial clearances so high that practically no one below the rank of Inquisitor Lord has ever read them. What emerged from the Eye, as what it did while it was loose, and whether it was truly eliminated or simply pushed back until conditions allowed it to emerge again, these are questions without public answers. Some historians of the Forbidden have suggested that the Harrowing was not a chaos event in the conventional sense at all. That what came through the Cadian Gate during that period was something that had been using the Eye of Terror as cover. Something that arrived alongside chaos from the outside, using the warp storm as concealment the way a deep-sea predator uses darkness. Something from the space between stars that the chaos gods themselves might not fully understand or control. Mystery 46. The Dark Angels Fallen. How many are there, and what does Cypher know? The Dark Angels chapter. Yes, and the broader constellation of successor chapters that make up what is informally called the Unforgiven, carries a secret that would destroy them if it became public knowledge within the wrong channels of Imperial command. During the Horus Heresy, while Lion L. Johnson was campaigning with the full strength of his legion across the galaxy, a portion of the First Legion turned against their homeworld of Caliban. The specifics of why are themselves contested, who gave the orders, who was responding to orders, who was genuinely in revolt versus who was trying to contain a revolt. Because the event that resolved it, the Lion's return and the world's destruction in the conflict that followed, killed most of those who could have provided clear testimony. But the fallen who scattered through space and time when Caliban exploded are not all traitors in the straightforward chaos-worshipping sense. Many of them are warriors who were caught up in a political conflict. They may have only partially understood, who survived something their chapter's official history says killed everyone, and who have spent 10,000 years living under assumed names on worlds that have no idea what they are hosting. They are old by the standards of mortals. Their gene-crafted bodies age slowly. Some have accumulated long histories on the worlds they landed on, becoming community figures, local heroes, occasional objects of imperial administrative inconvenience when their unusual longevity begins attracting attention. So the Dark Angels hunt them not because they are uniformly dangerous, but because each one who is found and brought to the rock carries the potential to reveal the truth of what happened on Caliban. And that truth, whatever it is something the chapter's leadership fears more than almost any enemy they fight. Because the Dark Angels do not fully know the truth themselves. The Lion was absent during the worst of it. His return came after the moment of maximum crisis had already passed, and what he found when he arrived was the aftermath rather than the event. The records of what led to the rebellion, what Luther actually intended, what the warriors who followed him believed they were doing, was whether the fault lies with chaos corruption or with genuine political grievances about how the First Legion treated its Terran warriors versus its Calibanite ones, are not something the chapter's modern leadership can access cleanly. Their official history is incomplete, and they know it. The fallen who are captured and brought to the Rock are subjected to the most intensive interrogation the interrogator chaplains can apply. What they want from these sessions is not punishment, it is confession, the honest accounting of what happened. And from most fallen, what they get is versions of events that do not match the chapter's official record, each one adding to a pile of partial truths that points toward an original event, more complicated, more human, and more ambiguous than a simple story of traitor versus loyal. Cypher is the most senior surviving fallen. He carries with him the Lion Sword, a blade that by rights belongs to L. Johnson himself, recovered from Caliban in circumstances no one has fully explained. He has been moving through the galaxy for 10,000 years, avoiding capture by both the Dark Angels and the wider Inquisition, with a consistency that suggests either extraordinary luck or extraordinary planning. His trajectory, tracked in fragments across multiple reports and sightings, curves toward terror. He has been heading toward the Golden Throne for as long as anyone has been watching him. What he intends to do when he arrives is the mystery. The Dark Angels believe his arrival would be catastrophic, that he carries something dangerous or intends to do something dangerous, and that stopping him before he reaches his destination is a matter of existential priority. But the law also shows custodes who, when they had the opportunity to prevent him from moving further, chose not to. The word "not yet" whispered in one of the most loaded exchanges in recent 40K literature. Not yet, but the time will come. Cypher is going where he is going, and when he arrives, what happens may resolve more than just the Dark Angel's secret. Mystery 47. The Homunculi and the Drakari's role in the throne. The Drakari, those magnificent, terrible inheritors of the civilization that created Slaanesh, sustain themselves through suffering. Specifically, through causing it. The warp erosion that consumes ordinary elder souls the moment they die is held at bay for the Drakari by a program of continuous cruelty. The psychic food generated by pain and fear feeding into their spiritual reserves and keeping Slaanesh's hunger momentarily satiated. They have built an entire civilization around this necessity, and that civilization is, by any metric, extraordinarily good at what it does. The Homunculi, the ancient flesh sculptors who have been managing this process for millennia, understand the mechanics of life and death, of soul and body, in ways that make everyone else in the galaxy look like comparative amateurs. When the Golden Throne's decay reached a level of urgency that the Adeptus Custodes could no longer pretend was not critical, a faction within their leadership concluded that the Imperium did not have the knowledge to fix it alone. The engineering required was beyond anything in the Mechanicus's catalogue. The throne had been built in the dark age of technology by a mind unlike any that exists in the 41st millennium, using techniques that had been lost along with almost everything else from that period. Conventional approaches had been tried and had achieved only the slowing of the decline, never its reversal. The decision that was made, in secrecy so deep that most of the Adeptus Custodes themselves were unaware of it, was to approach the Drakari. The Homunculi, with their unique expertise in the intersection of biology and mechanism, and with their specific knowledge of the webway technology that the throne partially incorporates, were identified as the only beings in the galaxy with a credible chance of providing the knowledge necessary for a real repair. The price the Drakari asked for this knowledge was genetic material from the Emperor's body, a sample of the most powerful psyker who has ever lived, from a being who carries within his DNA the combined legacy of thousands of prehistoric shamans and 50,000 years of accumulated mutation and refinement. What do you build from that? What does a civilization that specializes in biological sculpture and the engineering of life itself, that has had millennia to develop the necessary understanding of how genetics and psychic power interact, create, when given access to the raw material of a being like the Emperor? The arrangement collapsed. Inquisitors discovered it and objected. The Drukhari, as is entirely characteristic of them, had been pursuing their own agenda alongside the official one. But people who knew the details of the negotiation died in circumstances that were apparently unrelated, but were perhaps not. The knowledge of what the Drukhari were planning to do with the Emperor's genetic material was buried along with the people who had been involved. Mystery 48. What is Segorach protecting in the Black Library? The Black Library is the most dangerous archive in the galaxy. It contains knowledge of chaos so comprehensive, so carefully gathered across thousands of years, that it represents not just information, but a weapon. The full understanding of the ruinous powers, their weaknesses, their histories, the names and natures of their servants, the patterns of their manipulation across thousands of years of galactic history. It is hidden in the webway, its location not fixed to any permanent coordinates, as its access controlled by the Harlequins in service to the Laughing God. A very small number of individuals have been granted access across history. The criteria for selection are never fully explained. Some are inquisitors of extraordinary achievement and unusual psychological profiles, people who have looked into the worst things the galaxy contains and emerged not broken, but somehow clarified. Some are Eldar Farseers, whose prescience has led them, across years of careful navigation, to a door they were apparently always meant to find. Some are humans, whose life trajectories seem to have been guided toward the library's door by a process that operated well before those individuals were born. What happens inside the Black Library? What knowledge is available? What the price of accessing it is? How the material is organized? Now, who else might have been there before you is not systematically documented. What comes back out of the library is filtered by the people who experienced it, and those people have generally been profoundly changed by the experience in ways that make reliable reporting difficult. The mystery is not just the library's contents, though that is its own endlessly fascinating question, but the curation. Segorach curates. He allows some knowledge to be preserved and makes other knowledge inaccessible, even in this supposedly comprehensive repository. Things that were documented, things that should be there, are sometimes absent. The gaps are noticed by those with enough context to recognize them, but the reasoning behind them is never given. What has the Laughing God chosen not to preserve, and why? The answer to that question might be more important than any single item in the library's actual collection. A trickster god who runs the galaxy's most important archive and makes deliberate decisions about what to include and what to exclude is exercising a kind of editorial power over the galaxy's understanding of its own greatest threat. What Segorach has chosen not to remember, or chosen not to allow to be remembered, could be the most significant mystery in this entire setting. Mystery 49. The Great Rift and what lives in its heart. The Cicatrix Maledictum. The Great Rift, the wound in reality that tore the Milky Way in half following the destruction of Cadia, is not simply a larger Eye of Terror. The Eye of Terror was a known, us-bounded region with relatively stable edges and a long-established geography of demonic worlds and warp-touch space that Imperial navigators had been mapping for 10,000 years. Its behavior was never safe, but it was predictable within certain parameters. And predictions matter enormously when you are planning military operations. The Great Rift is something qualitatively different. A jagged tear running across the galaxy's midsection. It cuts off the Ultima Segmentum, including the Eastern Fringe, the realm of Ultramar, and countless worlds that were left suddenly unable to receive reinforcement from the Astronomican-guided shipping lanes that had sustained them, from direct contact with Terra. Ships crossing the rift must navigate through conditions that make ordinary warp transit look like a relaxing journey. Time behaves inconsistently within the rift's influence zone, creating what became known as the Noctis Eterna. a period of complete darkness and chaos during which many worlds, cut off from the Astronomicon and from any communication, simply had to survive on their own, with no knowledge of whether the Imperium still existed. Inside the rift itself, conditions that have no equivalent elsewhere in the galaxy apply continuously. The boundary between the material universe and the immaterial one is so compromised that it is sometimes not possible to clearly identify which side of that boundary you are on. Physical laws that operate with perfect consistency elsewhere become suggestions. Time runs at different rates in adjacent locations, producing situations where the same event is experienced at different points in its sequence by observers only light seconds apart. The dead do not necessarily stay dead. The living do not necessarily stay alive in the conventional sense. And in the deepest regions of the rift, in areas where no Imperial expedition has penetrated and returned, there are signals, not the random noise of raw warp energy, the psychic static generated by the Chaos God's endless churning appetites, not the simple broadcasts of surviving populations calling for help from whatever fragile shelter they have found. Patterns, repeated structures with no obvious natural source, things that repeat in ways that suggest either mathematical regularity or deliberate communication. What is generating those patterns? Well, the Chaos Gods themselves are not subtle enough to be the source. Their communications with the material universe are generally far less ambiguous than a repeating signal that might be a natural warp resonance and might be something sending a message. Something is in the deepest heart of the Great Rift that was not there before it opened, or was there before but was hidden while the rift did not exist to provide it an avenue of expression. And it is doing something that the Imperium's instruments are detecting but not understanding. Whether it is a new player in the galaxy's apocalyptic drama, a form of chaos not previously encountered, or something that has been waiting in the warp since before the Chaos Gods were born, is a question that recent lore has opened but not yet begun to answer. Or Mystery 50. What happens when the Emperor finally dies, or wakes up? We end where we began, because every mystery in this setting leads eventually back to the Golden Throne. The Emperor is dying slowly. The machine that maintains him is failing faster with every passing generation. The knowledge needed to repair it is buried under layers of catastrophe, secrecy, and time. The alternatives: killing him to free him, allowing him to complete whatever transformation he is in the middle of, sacrificing everything necessary to maintain the status quo for another 1,000 years. Each carry consequences so enormous that no one within the setting can fully evaluate them. If he dies on the throne in the conventional sense, his physical form ceasing to function, yet his consciousness no longer anchored to the machine, the cascade of consequences begins immediately. The warp breach that Magnus accidentally created, that the Emperor has been holding shut for 10,000 years, tears open fully. The Imperial Palace on Terra becomes the center of a demonic incursion without parallel in the historical record. The Astronomicon goes dark simultaneously. Ships across the galaxy lose their navigation beacon and begin the desperate calculations of whether they can reach safety on Dead Reckoning alone. The Chaos Gods, who have been pressing against the Emperor's psychic barriers for millennia, push through everywhere simultaneously. Terra becomes an eye of terror made manifest at the heart of human civilization. The Imperium does not simply fall in this scenario, when it shatters in a way that leaves nothing to reassemble. There are no fragments that survive intact enough to rebuild from. This is the catastrophe that the Golden Throne's maintenance is preventing, day by day, psyche by psyche, in a process so routine it has been normalized into ritual. 1,000 souls a day. They have a name for this. They call it an honor. They have built a religion around the necessity of it, and it still may not be enough. If he wakes up, if the throne is repaired or circumvented, if the Emperor recovers enough to exercise genuine agency, rather than passive maintenance of a dying system, the question is who or what walks away from it. 10,000 years sitting at the intersection of life and death, at the nexus between the material universe and the immaterial one, processing the psychic resonance of 1 billion deaths annually, being worshipped by more beings than have ever in history prayed to any single object of devotion simultaneously. What does that do to a consciousness? What does 10,000 years of involuntary apotheosis produce? Malcador the Sigillite, the most powerful human psyker in history aside from the emperor himself, sat on the throne for a single day while the emperor went to face Horus. One day, he emerged unable to speak, his mind consumed by whatever the throne demands of its occupant, and died within hours of being removed from it. The emperor has been there for 10,000 years. The being that stands up from that throne, if anything ever does, would not be the same being that sat down. It would not be the emperor who walked among early humans for 50,000 years, and who planned the Great Crusade and believed in the rational potential of humanity, who hated religion and built an empire that deified him despite himself. It would be something new, something shaped by 10 millennia of exposure to the full weight of human history's suffering and faith and hope and grief and terrible, desperate love. It would be, in all but the narrowest technical definitions, a god, but not the one anyone was praying to. Whether that new thing would be salvation or the final catastrophe, whether the Grey Knight's terminus decree would need to be invoked, whether the Star Child and the Dark King and all the ancient prophecies would play out as triumph or tragedy. This is the question that the lore has been slowly, carefully, lovingly building toward for 40 years. And Games Workshop, yet in its infinite and perhaps intentional cruelty, has not yet given us the answer. The mystery endures. The watch continues. A final thought. There is something worth sitting with before the silence fully returns. This universe, this gorgeous, terrible, grim dark, occasionally absurd but always meaningful universe, was built on the understanding that some questions should not be answered. That mystery is not the enemy of meaning, but its necessary companion. That the not knowing is the space where imagination lives, where each person who loves this setting can plant something of their own and watch it grow. The 50 mysteries we have walked through tonight are not gaps or oversights. They are features, deliberately maintained. They are the evidence of a setting complex enough to carry questions without needing to immediately resolve them. As a universe confident enough in its own richness to leave doors closed and trust that the doors themselves are interesting. The best art does not explain everything. It trusts its audience to bring themselves to the encounter. Somewhere in the cold dark between the stars, the golden throne hums its thin electric hum. The emperor dreams, or suffers, or plans, or grieves. We do not know which, and perhaps that is as it should be. The Star Child drifts in the warp like a seed waiting for conditions that have not yet arrived. The Silent King moves his pieces across a board so large that most of the other players do not even know they are in the game. The Great Rift bleeds light that is not light. The hive mind reaches forward, one tendril at a time, guided by signals it has been following for longer than humanity has existed. And in the deep halls of ancient tombs, in the cold dark of the ghoul stars, in the private rooms of inquisitorial archives and the hidden libraries of the webway, in the hearts of the old Primarchs, returning one by one from wherever they were lost, the answers wait, patient, certain of their own eventual arrival. The vigil continues. The watch is not yet ended. If you made it all the way here, through every mystery and every dark corner we walked together, then genuinely, thank you. This was a long journey, and you chose to take every step of it. There are few things more satisfying than sitting with someone in the dark and looking carefully at the things that live there. If any of these mysteries sparked something in you, a theory you had never considered before, a question you are now unable to stop turning over in your mind, and a specific mystery you want to dig into much more deeply than we were able to here, please put it in the comments. Every comment here becomes a conversation, and conversations about 40K lore are one of the genuinely good things about the internet. If this felt like time well spent, and you want to see more dives into the lore, the setting's deep history, and the mysteries that make 40K one of the richest fictional universes ever built, Hitting the like button takes 2 seconds and makes a genuinely meaningful difference in helping this channel find the people who would love it. And if you want to be here when the next descent into the dark happens, subscribe and ring the notification bell. The Astronomicon will light the way. See you in the next one.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.